Hi, Anna. So nice to have you here on Ameba Meets. I think, just as a quick background, we've met at Source Fashion, and you've actually been the host of a panel discussion that I was part of, and you hosted it so amazingly that I said, let's chat a little bit more. And then I found out, 33 years at John Lewis, now starting your own company for some time already with Retail 100. Really a fascinating process and such an incredible background. Thank you so much for being here.
It's an absolute pleasure, Cedric. And I won't share all 33 years with you because I think I could talk about this for days and days. But yeah, started in retail, post university, did a degree in history, didn't know what I wanted to do, found my way into John Lewis as a graduate trainee and joined for three, stayed for 33 years. In that time, I did more than 22 different roles, which was the great thing about working for a department store because you could end up in different categories doing different roles. And it felt like learning different parts of the business. So started off in fashion, menswear of all things, then went into buying sports. I bought jewelry and watches. Then I was a senior beauty buyer and then went from beauty to be head of buying for home. So when I went into home, Cedric, I had absolutely no home experience, which I think is actually really useful. So for the buyers below, at least I'm not telling them what product to buy. I'm just there to tilt the tiller, look at the strategy, look at it objectively, and understand how we can drive the business forward. So the beauty of working for a big department store that although you're there for a long time, you learn different things because you're moving across all of the categories.
Absolutely. And then, how did this then end up leading into Retail 100? And maybe you can tell us a little bit more. What is it that you do at Retail 100 as well?
Absolutely. So post-COVID, we had some consultants in, as you do, and they decided to change the way the teams were run. And as a head of buying, I wasn't comfortable with how it was going. So I decided that the timing is right to go. And I probably would never have left John Lewis apart from that. And in a way, change is a good thing. And I'm very much one of those people who embraces change and always looks forward. I'm a lifelong learner. I love learning about things and I'm kind of nosy and curious. And I think as a retail consultant, what I've learned is you're learning all the time. So myself and three other colleagues that I worked with at John Lewis set up Retail100 Consulting. We're 3 years old in April there. And the reason we're called Retail100 Consulting is that between the four of us, we have over 100 years of retail experience. So we've kind of covered every category across retail that you can imagine, across home, technology and fashion at John Lewis, but also across the food retail as well. And that has really helped us in our consulting. And we were very clear about the purpose of Retail 100, that it was not going to be the traditional consultant who go in, kind of cause mayhem and have no context. We are very clear that we are very collaborative, very open. And with our clients, we have a real understanding of the categories that they're asking us to support on, but we work with them. So we're very clear that we come from a very commercial, strategic standpoint. And that if we don't have the capacity to do something, we'll say it, but we'll actually really drive their business forward in a very open and honest and collaborative way. And that's been the response from our clients. And the beauty of that is that we've worked for maybe just over 50 clients in the last 3 years. Less than five of those I bought into John Lewis because everybody wants to get them into John Lewis. But we will only bring brands to John Lewis that are right. We've obviously bought them to other brands. So we will help people strategically to manage their business. And we've loved it because we've done everything from finding 3PLs from someone to doing a strategy to doing product. And we've also done a couple of really interesting startup brands where we've helped them from the very start of their business on what their purpose should be, what their product should be, and what their whole packaging and then their 3PL. So actually to see a business from start to finish has been amazing. So we're enjoying the kind of diversity of what you do as a consultant.
And I think it probably, as you've mentioned, I mean, you've rotated through so many different categories as a buyer. Um, you certainly get an insight on what are the common drivers across these different categories, but also what are the differences. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about exactly that, what you've just mentioned, where, what is the commonality that you have between homeware and maybe even fashion, or, what is the difference? You've also done some jewelry. So I think it's just such a fascinating experience where you've seen so many different things. And I think from an outside perspective, it always seems that the buying process is the same, but certainly underlying that there must be huge differences across these different categories.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Cedric. I think for me, coming from beauty, which I adored, straight into homewares was amazing to see the difference. So I came to homewares with a completely different perspective, and I was running Gift, Cook and Dine, which is the fastest element of homewares and the highest numbers of brands at John Lewis. The rest of homeware is quite own brand focused. It was about 70% in furniture and textiles. In my area, it was about 50-50 branded. So I was very well used to dealing with brands, but what the lessons that I took from beauty and jewelry were things that didn't happen in homewares. They were much slower. They lacked the pace. They lacked the force of new product development. So beauty is a really good example of retail at its sharpest. They know that you must innovate constantly. It's an incredibly competitive market. But if you look at the beauty world, it's great because it's pretty much does well in all climates. Even when things are tough, it does well. But they're brilliant at new product development, marketing, brand equity, and service. So when you look at beauty in those big department stores, it's really critical for driving footfall into shops still in this kind of omni-channel world. But what they're very good at is saying, here's what my brand's about. It's very clear. These are the key items that I sell. They can do it in 2 foot. They can do it brilliantly and do their storytelling. And they're very good at driving the marketing aspects of what they do as well. So they have the whole package. They're pretty tricky to deal with, by the way, particularly the big brands, but they are excellent at new product development. So I took quite a lot of the learnings from beauty and jewelry, where it was much more about fast pace and responding to trends, into the gifts, cook and dine area. And one example of that was that we in gifting, we didn't even have our own brand. We just had brands. And I had looked at what was happening out in the market. So we got the team to develop an own brand range. But when we developed it, it wasn't just about the product. It was a fashionable product that would turn much more quickly. So every 6 months it would change. It was about gifting at a low to mid price point. It was fashionable. We also transformed how it looked in the shop in the way that a beauty brand would. So it was all bought together. We branded it. We did a marketing campaign. We did social media. So all the key tricks that those brands would have, we then applied to own brand and home. And we launched that brand in less than 6 months, which is the fastest of any own brand in John Lewis at pace, and drove unbelievable sales and profit margin. So we got the benefit of fashion and style in home and gifting and some profit.
I think we see this increasingly more where there were quite a few multi-channel retailers that then actually went out and started their own brand categories because they just saw, okay, either there's an opportunity in the market or also a gap in the market. There's a German fashion brand that I've recently met with, and the founder of that fashion brand was actually also head of buying at a very large fashion department store in Germany, a little bit similar to John Lewis, and he had to look for mid-luxury type casual wear menswear brand because they wanted to complement their entire product offering. And he was looking for it around the world, couldn't find it, and said, you know what, let's do it ourselves. And I think it's one of those really interesting things to think about is how much encouragement is there actually internally to say, okay, instead of just doing the department store element, let's also think about developing our own brands. How did you go about that? I mean, was a lot of pushback, or it's super fascinating to think about the decision making that happens between, okay, there's obviously a capital investment and a time investment, and suddenly your role as a buyer shifts from buying from established brands or companies where everything also on the supply chain side is running smoothly, to now you actually become the buyer for the own brand, and you sort of need to set this up from scratch. And as you say, maybe even within 6 months. So how did you do that?
It was the most amazing project. And I think we did it in a very different way at John Lewis. We did it because John Lewis is very, very big company and people tend to work in silos. So what we did is we actually built a working group, and we built into that working group, we put a buyer, I put a project manager, we put people in from online, we put marketing in, and they all sat together in the same room. So we actually built this whole working group. We'd never worked this way before. We worked with our Hong Kong trading offices and our Indian offices and said, okay, we want to do this at pace because we started it in January, wanted to launch it for Christmas. So I led a working group, and I was there to go to the business to say that if we are going to launch this brand, we need money behind it, to your point, Cedric. So what we also did was I went to the board and was to go and get the money. to pitch where we thought this brand could be, that it was going to be a point of differentiation, which in business is really critical. And I think I talked about this many times. You can buy anything, anywhere, at any price from anyone at the minute, which is why own brand is much more important than it's ever been before. Why would you go to John Lewis or a Marks and Spencer's if you can get the same thing everywhere? So the importance of building your own brand is critical. And we could see that gap in the gifting market. So we went to the board and said, we want to do this, but we don't want to just do a brand and chuck it on a shelf. We want to say to people, here we are, this is what we're about. So we held all those key stakeholders in the business and got them to be part of the process, because when you're in a big business, it's really hard to get people excited. If you come to them and say, look, I've got this pen, it's really exciting, make it famous, the marketing team kind of go, yeah, well, I'm not that interested in that. But if you have the marketing team in the project at the start of it, they really like it because it's their project. So they wanted to be part of it. So it's very easy to get the stakeholders in the business involved if you make them part of that project up front. One of the very interesting things about it was when we were doing the fixturing, we worked at pace, and that can be difficult. And the team who had done the fixturing, I'd worked with them really closely when I was in beauty, and we'd have all sorts of struggles with them because they were always holding the line. No, you can't give Charlotte Tilbury what they want. You can't give Chanel what they want. So I knew that team really well, and this is where relationships come in. And when I got them to do the fixturing for this, they had to call me 2 weeks before we launched. We'd got press involved. They were all coming to see this new range. All the best retail press were coming to a big meeting on the roof at Oxford Street. And because the business was excited about this new brand, we were launching fashion, but they also wanted to launch this new range of gifting. And he rang me 2 Fridays before to tell me the fixturing wasn't passing the test. It wasn't going to be ready. And I'd wanted it in 10 branches. So all I said to him is, get me Oxford Street and we'll worry about the rest later. But that was all built on relationships. And he rang me afterwards and said, I'm so sorry about this. And because he was part of the project, he had a stake in it and wanted to fix it. So it was a real lesson for me that when you bring people in early enough and they feel that they're part of the ownership, you can work at pace. So it was the fastest we've ever developed a new brand, new fixturing, new marketing campaign, and it was phenomenally successful. It did really, really well.
I think it's incredible because obviously you also have the exposure to the market directly as a retailer. So you know exactly what the market wants and you can actually move at pace there. Whereas I think for a lot of brands that then sell towards the retailer, they don't have the direct sales channel to the customers. And I think that's where this whole concept around direct to consumer D2C really became so popular, and also online trade, because at some point, a lot of big retailers or fashion brands actually said, hey, we want to be very, very close to the market. We want to know exactly what the consumer wants, and then we can execute at it at pace. But then again, that's there was this whole debacle. Actually, I think Nike had this big issue where Nike went from a strategy that was, okay, we really rely on retailers, to then moving back to no, now we do it by ourselves. Now we're going to do D2C. Now we're going to move back to retailers. And obviously, it means a huge gear shift, not just on the strategic side, but also on the supply chain element. How do you distribute it on the costing side? So I think getting clarity around that is actually really important. And a lot of brands probably don't realize how hard it also can be to transition from having a very heavy retail focus to doing D2C, or then again vice versa, moving back and forth, because as you mentioned, it's also about the relationships, and there's also only limited capacity within John Lewis of what you can actually stock, and who do you want to stock, and also what is the typical consumer that goes to John Lewis that then wants to look for certain brands.
That's absolutely right. I mean, Cedric, you've hit it perfectly. And I think it's a blend of both. I think people jump too far the D2C way and then realize that you were spending lots of money on stock and marketing and returns. It's not that easy. What someone like a department store like John Lewis or Marks and Spencer's can give you is that they have a very loyal customer who shops with them all of the time. So they know that if John Lewis have edited and curated the market and got that brand in there, that it's a great brand to buy. So they are your shop window. And you can do both. But I think things went too extremely down the D2C, and possibly, COVID accelerated that as well. What's quite joyful to me in the opportunities in retail now is that the shop is kind of fighting back, that people do want to go to shops. They do want to pick things up, and particularly in fashion, because the difficulty of fashion is the sizing and trying things on and picking things up impulsively. And the problem with fashion, which you'll know very well, is from a sustainable point of view, delivering everything's not great. The returns are up to 50% for a lot of retailers, and it's really, really unwieldy, and it costs suppliers a lot of money. So making profit out of it means that you need to balance how much you want to do direct to customer yourself and how much you want it to be hosted by those big brands that customers know and love and will shop with. So, John Lewis, I would say, is a shop window for our brand, but also the service that's wrapped around it. Because if you're buying something technical, you want to go in and get some support. If you're buying a sofa, you want to sit on it before you buy it. You may then click it home. Even TVs, which 68% of which we'd sell online, people go and look at the TV in the shop. They want to see what size it is and the quality of the picture. So they're very omni journeys. You want to be able to do both. And shops have to evolve and change to do that. They need to be more exciting. They need to make sure their service proposition is good. There needs to be a reason why you would shop. So, 5-year guarantees on TVs is one of the key things about John Lewis. The fact that, very much their customers are Apple customers. They love to buy Apple and John Lewis. So knowing your customer really intimately and having data on them, which we have with our partnership card, is we know what they want. We know what life stage they are.
Absolutely. Would you say that the job of a buyer has changed over the last 30 plus years? As in, how did we do buying 30 years ago or 20 years ago, and how is it informed today? Because obviously on the one hand there's much more data available, but also there are many more products and more brands available and more niche brands available. So actually navigating that entire environment must be much more difficult, I can imagine, or also has many more opportunities to select the right products today as opposed to in the past. How did you see that changing?
I think it's a really amazing question, because I was a buyer way back before all that data was available. And data is fantastic, but it's using the data correctly, isn't it? Because you can have that paralysis by analysis. You end up having too much data. But the benefit of data is it doesn't make your life easier. It just means you have to respond faster. So I think for me, the key change in buying is all about agility. You have to be much quicker. You have to be much more agile. Trends change much faster than they did before. So I think when we talked about me moving from fashion into home, what we've seen in homewares is that people don't buy sofas for 20 and 30 years. They will still buy a quality item from John Lewis, but they'll layer up and they'll change it much more frequently. So you'll see things like, there's washable rugs now that are really popular, cushions that get changed all much more frequently. People change their colors often. So you have to be much more on the mark. You need to be much more agile in terms of your supply chain, because the supply chains have been incredibly bumpy. And I think COVID really taught us that too much for too long in factories, that the timeline was too long and the critical path was too long. So having a strategy that is more agile, we talk about sort of near shore, far shore, not putting all your eggs in one basket. You have to be able to move much faster. I think as a buyer, you need to be much more strategic. You have great tools in that you have the internet, so you can look at the world very quickly and see what's there. But you also need to be really, really focused on who is my customer, what do they want, and where do I stretch and where do I trial? And what you tend to see, there's been lots of changes in the retail market, and I think the experience of buyers is not there, and we hear that from quite a lot of our clients. So having experience and strategic understanding of how the world works is really important to the buyer. It's not just good enough. I always say buying is a bit of art and science mix. You need to be able to do both. There's no point in being really fantastic on color if you end up buying 150 of the purple and 3 of the black. You got to buy the core. So it's understanding how that works. But I do think it's all about speed and agility now, and relationships. If you're,
Especially
a mature, good relationship.
Absolutely. And I think especially in this, we touched upon it before we started this conversation, in this very volatile market environment, because I think I can imagine that in a lot of places at some point there was a playbook established for buying, and then buying for a lot of junior buyers became really more of an administrative job as opposed to, being creative and thinking about it. But the entire playbook actually breaks the minute that the market changes. And you just mentioned you just came back from China and spent some time in China, and I think it was super fascinating because, again, the big elephant in the room, the tariffs that are happening, sort of we're at a brink of a complete trade war across the world. And I think there's this element, at least what I see as a former supply chain operator, where there seems to be also on a lot of brands and even retailer side, a disconnect between what is actually movable on the supply chain side and what's actually happening, because it's not as easy. We've talked about it, that you can now just find a nearshore, just find a factory around the corner that will do the same thing and the same product. Manufacturing is much, much more complex than that. So I mean, what was your experience like when you just went to China? What's the sentiment?
Yeah, I think it was crazy. We were at a big trade show in Hong Kong, and it was very interesting because we were talking to Chinese factory owners, Vietnamese factory owners, and I think the whole world was like, we don't really know. The uncertainty is the thing that makes the difficult part. And it isn't as straightforward as moving factories, as we said, Cedric, because what you tend to find is that you have long-term relationships with big factories. So the core of your business is going to be with a factory that you've worked with for many years. You may test smaller factories for newer elements of your business, but you can generally imagine that for most retailers, they will work with a core group of factories. And what you want is to work with factories, because if you have more of your business with factories, they will respond to you and you'll build relationships. And as we've said, business is about relationships. People buy from people. And it was very interesting there, because it's not as straightforward as saying, okay, now we've got tariffs of 145% in China, let's move, because that's not how the world works. But what was very interesting is that people were working collaboratively to say, how do we get through this? It's not a question of, saying, the factory owner has to take all the hit on that, because they simply can't. And it was very difficult. There were small factories who were just shutting their doors temporarily to say, we cannot do this. So I think that's the understanding that for business, it's about how do you manage the complexities when things are difficult. I know when COVID happened, one of the responses we got from our factories is, although we had to hold on stock in certain categories. So for example, if you're a department store, you can do certain things. You can cook and dine was flying because people were eating at home. So we're buying more of cook and dine and less of other things. But it's saying to the factories that we had long-term relationships, can you hold those for us? We will take them eventually. Can you hold them? And we'll take elements, but just communicating, because they knew there was an issue. And they said we were one of the few retailers who actually had a conversation with them. And that means when you come out of COVID, you're in a much stronger position. So what I could see was lots of people having long negotiations and conversations about how they manage this. And, we've been here before. COVID was a real shock to the system. And I think that agility and that balancing your sourcing structure. So you do have to de-risk. I think we've learned that, not to have all your eggs in one basket and have a blend. And depending on what your product is and who your customer is, if you can do a bit of what you tend to find in something like denim might come from Bangladesh or it might come from China. But what you can do for the fashionable bits is you can get those from Europe. And when you want to do high trend, you want to be able to respond. So how we advise retailers when we're helping them is, you don't have to, they focus on the margin they get from the factory. And what we'll say to them, you need to focus on the out margin rather than the in, because there is no point in getting 80% margin because you're buying it from a big volume factory when you're not going to sell all that volume. So we helped one of our clients who were constantly buying minimum order quantities of 5,000 and selling 2. So their out margin was like 20%. So actually we said, that's not where you should be buying. That fashion end you should move. And even if you're getting a 60 or 70% margin in Portugal or Spain, you can respond faster. You don't have to buy the volume. So it's learning what's right for your business. And that's where the skill of a buyer comes in, is that you can manage the market when it's difficult.
Absolutely. And I think there was one thing that you've mentioned in the past, which I find eye-opening. We talked about setting also from a strategic level the right KPIs for the buyers. Because obviously if you say, okay, your KPI is to drive costs down, then okay, I go with high volume and as cheap as possible. But either you don't have the quality nor the speed and the agility to respond to the market. And there was one thing that you've mentioned in the past, which I would love to touch upon, which is also KPIs around sustainability. Because obviously there's a long-term view and then there's a short-term view, and you can always optimize for the cost in the short term. But then you also need to be mindful of, okay, what will be the implications in the long term as you make these very big strategic decisions on how you evaluate suppliers, how do you work with different suppliers, how much volume do you give to a certain supplier, and I think you've touched upon that again in our previous conversation, where you mentioned you've been driven this whole initiative to also have certain sustainability and ESG KPIs that buyers need to be mindful of, just to kind of insert this long-term, not a pressure, but a KPI to also think more long-term, at least on an ESG angle and from an ESG perspective, and not just be in this whole, this motion of let's just optimize for today, and nobody cares about what's going to happen in 3 or 6 or 12 months time.
I mean, that's very typical of someone like John Lewis, but other retailers I've talked to, it's sort of easier if you're a John Lewis because you're investing in value and quality at a price. So very much buy well, buy once. It was very much a strategy. We're there for the long term. We're not there to make a quick buck just to sell volume. And John Lewis, although it's a big player, is not a volume retailer like a supermarket, like a Tesco or a Sainsbury's. But it was very much about, there's a huge corporate social responsibility department in John Lewis. There's a whole team, but buyers are KPI'd on that. You're absolutely right. Where are you sourcing from? What is that factory like? The obvious SEDEX and the obviously the things that you need to have certified, but also how can we be more sustainable? How can we manage our supply chain so we're never flying goods in, where we're always making sure that they're going the most sustainable routes? How do we work with factories? And it's not as obvious as, UK good, China bad, because there's some amazing factories in China with solar power and amazing sustainable attributes to them. But it's making sure that you're taking the extra step. So in furniture and home, we were very much at the forefront of FSC and making sure that we knew where our sourcing was coming from, making sure it was about people and planet as well. So how are the people being treated? It's not just about the obvious sustainability, but it's that whole ethical and social responsibility, as you say, Cedric. How are we adding to the world in the way that we're sourcing? Because again, I would have conversations with a brand who will say, well, I don't want to, source in India because I want to source in the UK. And I said, yes, but those factories in India are sustaining a whole livelihood for people. And these good factories in India with very high sustainable credentials, and we work with a number of people who have it, are actually supporting that country. And those people would not have jobs. And they said, well, I'd never really thought of it from that perspective. So it's always slightly nuanced, Cedric, where you push a lever down here and it pops up there. But it's you trying to balance the best of your sourcing strategy that is right for the world, and more trials coming of how to buy quality goods that can go into landfill, that can be repurposed, that are natural fibers. And there was an amazing exhibition when I was in Hong Kong that Next were supporting of 10 and 12 different suppliers, and it was all about circularity, whether it was made out of mushrooms or whether it was fabric that had been repurposed. But the whole hall was all about sustainability, and I think people would be surprised that you'd be in a show that's attracting a lot of Chinese vendors and people from the East. They're really on to that sustainability message. And while Trump might have taken his foot off the pedal on it at the minute, for the world, we have got to do it. There is no choice. But it's doing it in a way that is sustainable, that you can do, and you're building it appropriately. It's not just about here's a hit for a greenwashing. It's actually truly having it in your strategy and it runs right through your sourcing strategy, that there is a sustainable element.
I found it so, and it's fascinating. I found it so hard. So, for background, in my last company, we've managed a portfolio of 25 different brands that we acquired and hold up in a holding company. 60% of the portfolio was not in fashion. It was actually in hard goods and homeware as well. So I was, I was managing a homeware supply chain primarily, and then we also had fashion and CPG and cosmetics. And for homeware, it was just so challenging to quickly optimize the supply chain, because as you say, you have these long-term relationships, and it's not as much of a volume game as in fashion. It's also not as flexible as you have in other categories. And I think one of the biggest learnings that we've had, coming back also what you mentioned to the different retail channels, was we were primarily selling our goods via Amazon and Mercado Libre, which is the Amazon equivalent in Latin America. And what we realized is, for the brands that we acquired that were very strongly positioned on Amazon, was still a race to the bottom, because in the end, the consumer that goes on Amazon to look for a desk, is probably going to look for the cheapest desk with the highest number of reviews, and is not going to optimize for a certain level of quality. For us to then make this jump into the retail landscape and to really increase the brand equity of the brands that we've bought, but also through the supply chain and the quality of the goods that we could buy and then sell via that brand, it was extremely challenging. And it's really where the supply chain then also merged together with the brand strategy and the brand equity, because again, you can have a very high value brand, but the goods also then need to have a certain level of quality. And once you then bring sustainability in for certain consumers that actually really care about sustainability, it's usually consumers that are also having a willingness to pay for certain brands and for the brand equity. So it's this really super challenging. Think about like a Venn diagram. How do you piece all of these different things together and find the optimal spot for your brand and for your company, on the supply chain side, on the retail channel side, but also on the brand equity side? And how does it actually merge together?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I wish I knew. I mean, it's very difficult, Cedric. There are so many different parts to it. And for example, we on cookware is a really good example because we had some consultants in who wanted us to resource our cookware to a different factory. And we pushed back and said, no, because John Lewis is not a volume supermarket player. It's not a Walmart. This was a Walmart factory. And I said, we won't play in that factory because the quality is not good enough for us. So if we're going to put a John Lewis brand name on it, it has to be of a certain quality. And the samples kept coming through and they weren't good enough quality. So we were like, we're not going to do it. You might think that you'll get us more margin, but the reputation of the company, and that's when you're in a mid to premium space, that's fine. But we were very, very clear. And we had sourced that cookware via Belgium. And it was still going 20 years on with the John Lewis name because it was about quality. And there are certain things where you can change. So, sometimes we would maybe over engineer product for a price at John Lewis, but we were very clear that it was a brand. But I think it's quite interesting to see how the market is changing because traditionally, glassware is a really good example. We wouldn't go to China for glass because it wasn't this right quality and we would say it's got bubbles. But we were over engineering glass at all price points for customers. And sometimes customers saying, I just want it to be good enough. So when you have a pricing architecture, you can source it at different levels. And it's now very interesting to see how far China has come on glassware now. It's got amazing quality of glassware, but it's all a balance of where do I want my quality to be? What do I think is absolutely the right quality of it? How much am I buying? What is my in margin? But more importantly, how much stock am I investing? Because if I end up with massive markdowns, there is no point in sourcing it. And this overproduction we've talked about, particularly in fashion, is a real worry for the business, that 40% of fashion that's bought and fast fashion doesn't even hit the shop floor. It gets, because there's so much overproduction because you're buying big runs to get a price. And what businesses need to do is rethink and say, okay, maybe my in margin is slightly less, but I'm not losing so much out the other end because I'm not reducing all of this. And fashion is much more difficult because it's so different. And to your point, homewares, you're paying for expensive tooling sometimes. So that's got to run 2 or 3 years on a saucepan, or 5 years, or on a sofa it's going to be 5 or 10 years because you've bought expensive tooling. So it's always a blend, and that's where in retail a good buyer worth their salt understands it's not, if they have to make a 60% margin, they don't make 60 on everything. They might make 80 on one and 40 on another, but you blend your margin, and that's the clever part. What's important? It's got to start with the quality of the product and where I'm, how I can make it the best value possible. I won't over engineer, I won't over package it, which is another interesting part where actually that's taken a lot of cost out, the packaging EU directives. But the EU directives are coming on fashion. And if you overproduce, the overproducer is going to have to get rid of it. So there's not going to be the incentive now to overproduce, because that's one of the big problems that we have, is this overproduction and this waste that people just have this throwaway mentality. So it's trying to say to people, don't buy 5 colored t-shirts, at a cheap price, buy 2 better, and that will take time. And it'll be interesting to see, because Gen Z, the generation coming through, are going to have so much disposable income, how they're going to shop in the future. But as a retailer, it's really important that you blend your margin, you blend your sourcing strategy, and one size really doesn't fit all.
Absolutely. And I think that what I would find fascinating, I mean, you are now advising such a broad range of brands, from small to mid-sized brands all the way to quite some large brands as well. You know, what is the common question or common problems that folks come to you and ask for your help? Or is it very, very diverse, and sometimes we talk about brand positioning and sometimes it is about the supply chain? Or is there like a common theme that you see where you say, okay, right now at this moment in time, most brands actually really, really struggle more on the supply chain side, or more on the positioning side, how to get into certain retailers? What's the common thing and the common theme that you're seeing?
I mean, we've had a real diverse range of jobs, but one of the key themes will be, how do I get into this retailer? If it's a newish brand, particularly we work with the Irish Enterprise Company when I'm working with Hong Kong. It's people who don't know the UK market, and what we can provide is a real insight into the UK market. So when I was in Hong Kong, I was giving a snapshot of what the UK market was. Fascinating that people have heard of John Lewis, of course, and Marks and Spencer's. Not very many of them knew about Dunelm, which was very interesting. It's the fastest homeware brand in the UK. It's got a lot of shops. It's got over 200 shops. They'd never heard of it. So it's really interesting that you have it. But what we would do with a client who's new to the UK market, and we've done this for a lot of Australian brands want to come into the UK now, because obviously it's a smaller country. There's only 23 million people in Australia, so they want to access the UK market. And what we will do, we'll channel manage for them to say, look, it's not possible for you to be in Tesco's and be in John Lewis. You have to decide where you sit. So making sure that the brand understands where the customer is for their brand and stays in that lane, because you cannot be all things to all men, certainly at the start of your journey. Amazon is interesting. Amazon is kind of, there's so much on there, and you can go into Amazon, but a big John Lewis and Harrods are not going to be excited about a brand that goes on Amazon, although they're sort of accepting of it because the market has changed. But it's understanding for brands, what is my purpose? Who is my customer? What does my brand represent? And having real clarity on that. And I quite often find that brands, particularly youngish brands, haven't really thought that through. So when you ask them, who are they? What is their story? What is their purpose? They don't really know. And that's really important. So we always advise strategically at the start, who is your brand? What is it all about? Because those brands like a Nike that have a very strong purpose, or a Patagonia at the other end of the scale, are very clear about why and they're pitched in the market. So being really clear about your purpose is important. And we've advised a lot on strategy to brands, because I think you understand is when you're in it, particularly as an owner of a brand, you're less subjective. Whereas we can kind of ask questions about, why have you pitched it like that? Or where is your pricing architecture? Or why is your packaging like that? Or it's not very clear to me. Or, by the way, this brand is great, but it's not for John Lewis, but it'd be fabulous in boots. And letting them understand that we really understand their brand and how we can help them. We're also very, very honest, and we've helped brands who strategically just need a tilt, who have been very set in one way. We just think, actually, you're great about recycling, but actually you need to think about reuse. So, and they've like, we didn't really think about it before. So you sort of help tilt them. And then we've come back. And the lovely thing is when we work for a brand on strategy, and they ask us then to come back in and help them with that. Because of course, certain categories we're experts in. We've done most of homeware. So if a brand wants to start something new and don't know that category, we can tell them how the category works. So for us, we're really enjoying it, because I'm a lifelong learner. I really enjoy actually just doing things that I haven't done in the past. But to your point, Cedric, if you've worked in one category, you know how to make things work in another category. You have that knowledge of, because the same things apply: purpose, quality, who is my customer, what does my brand stand for, and what do I see it in the future? And the other key thing I would say nowadays, with things being so tough, is the importance of partnerships. And I think we talked about that before the cameras started rolling. I'm all about partnering with people, because that is the way forward. And those clever, clever brands who form strong partnerships with a retailer or another brand or a collaboration, you're much stronger together. And people will say, oh yes, but I might be sharing the pie, but the pie can be 10 times the size if you work with the right partner. So you'll see quite a lot of clever retailers working with partners and expanding their business. One very good example is the Entertainer, the toy shop. It was Tesco's. They're not going to be in 3,000 Tesco's. I mean, that's just driven growth for them that they would never have been able to imagine. But clever strategies with the right partners are gold dust.
I think it's so fascinating. The couple of things that come to my mind, I still remember there was it was a massive challenge for Amazon to actually, and also for Mercado Libre, to get brands, real brands, establish their own shops on Amazon, because brands such as Nike or Puma, as an example, they didn't want to get diluted. And it's like, okay, now we're another Amazon shop, and where do we hold the brand equity? And in a very similar realm, one thing that I've read recently about was absolutely mind blowing to me. Bottega Veneta is one of the only luxury brands that does not have their own Instagram social media presence. And then you think about, how can it be that Bottega Veneta doesn't have an Instagram social media presence? Well, it is to maintain the realm of exclusivity that the brand actually has. And then you go back and think about, okay, the number one advice that everyone gives every brand is like, you need to be on social media, you need to max it out. But actually then you take a step back and think about, okay, what is more the longer strategic goal around the brand identity and the brand equity that I want to create? And how do I navigate these different strategies in order to actually really come back down to what is it that I wanted to achieve on a brand level? And very similar to lots of smaller brands, as I say, they jump on the opportunity to be in e-commerce without actually realizing, okay, what does it mean for the concept of my brand? And if I now Google, an up and coming, fashion brand as an example, or even a homeware brand, and I can see the homeware brand is on, some very, I don't know, some very, cheaper retailer websites, then my perception as a consumer is as well, okay, this is not a high quality brand. Whereas if there's a realm of exclusivity and I cannot buy it in every single shop, it means that there's something special about it. And as you say, I think tying back the the brand identity and the brand story to then the operational strategy of where do I actually want to play, which retailers where I want to be in, what's my supply chain like, the quality of the products is just immensely important.
Absolutely, and that's what we do when we advise brands, particularly brands that come in from other countries. We're very clear because they don't know we're working with a big American brand and saying this is the lane you would want to be in. As you say, you cannot be all things to all men. If your brand is in a mid to premium positioning, you don't want to be in these marketplaces because that will damage your brand equity. And once you're in there, you can't get out. So it's
No.
really difficult. And the brands who manage that brilliantly are the people like the Apples of this world. I mean, they can kind of be anywhere, I suppose. But the things like the beauty brands like Chanel and Charlotte Tilbury and people like that, you won't see Chanel on Amazon. You won't, because, but it took us 8 years to get Chanel to go online with John Lewis because it's a French company and they didn't want to do it. Now, this is way back in 2008, but the reason they didn't want to do it because they are very premium and very prestigious. But what they then understood is that if you're going to go anywhere, you're going to go with John Lewis, because if Chanel is on John Lewis, it's going to be the right thing. It's not going to be grey market stock. And we took fortunes for them because customers trust it's a brand. So I think it's really important if you're a premium brand that you hold on to that positioning, because the minute you dissipate it, you're kind of finished, really, aren't you? And it depends on your brand. So if you're a small brand, it's also very hard to go on lots of marketplaces because there's too much on there. So how's the customer ever going to find you? So you're going to end up on these marketplaces doing this really expensive setup, but no one's going to find you because you're just one of 10,000 brands. So it's being really careful about your brand positioning and your kind of strategic management of where you go.
Absolutely. One last question. I'm just being mindful of time, but there's this one question lingering in the back of my mind, which is, would you say there's a diversification, especially from the fashion world into the homeware market? So one thing that comes to my mind is we had Zara Home, at some point. And it's like, okay, Zara, now we have Zara Home. Or recently, I've been gifted a coffee cup from MS, and I was very excited. Somebody comes in with an MS, the orange MS bag, and I was like, yeah, it's nice. Getting a tie or getting something wearable, and I open up the box, and there's a coffee cup inside, and I appreciate any gift. It's a very nice gift. It was very unexpected for me to have now an MS coffee cup in my home. How do you see that? Is there a certain trend of diversification across different categories where fashion brands try to venture into the home and the homeware market? Or
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, there definitely is, Cedric. And I think because the fashion market is so flooded, I think fashion brands then look for another outlet in the homewares market. And two clear examples. Zara is a really good example. Beautiful homewares pitched at a very nice contemporary look in the Zara shop, and looks great, is absolutely right. H&M have done a great job on homewares as well. Really, but if you go and look at White City, it's probably one of their best. And they're very good because they'll bring and they'll manage it. They'll bring colors and stories and fashion trends together. It's interesting on the more premium brands because some of them have come into that market. Not many of them, though, and it's interesting that they don't manage to do it particularly well. Some of them go incredibly premium, and you might get, very, very expensive Dior plate or Dior can, but it doesn't drive any volume. So, but it is very interesting that there's a definite desire for more fashion brands to come into the homewares market because they can see there's a gap there. Definitely. Yeah.
which is probably then also, for any fashion brand or fashion buyer watching, maybe an interesting avenue to contact you and Retail 100, given that you guys have
Yeah,
so much experience
we've
in.
helped a few already, but yeah, there's definitely a definite niche if you've got the right brand and you think it can translate. If your customer is strong as well, because it has to. Your fashion brand is very strong. It needs to make sure that that's replicated in your homeware. By just label slapping is not going to work. It has to be authentic. But there's definitely more opportunities. But yeah, Zara and H&M have done great jobs, and I think there is room for some more fashion brands to come across into the home space.
And I guess also from the supply chain side, it's, especially if it's home textiles, there's a clear overlap. I mean, if you now start producing a sofa, it's maybe something else, but with a lot of, the supply chain, also the dynamics of the supply chain, it might be operationally similarly to manage, and you don't need to, build up an entire new team around that, and you can
Yeah,
actually
much
manage it
easier
with
on the
your
textile
existing.
side because if you're used to doing textiles, so home textiles or big categories, bed linen, cushions, whatever. Yeah, very easy. And some of them have. Yeah, Rixo are starting to do it. and Alice Templey Somerset has done some. So there are definitely some brands who've done it. Orla Kylie's a really good example of someone who does brilliantly on hard goods and soft goods and did have a fashion brand. So there are definite brands who are doing more of a crossover. And to your point, Cedric, the obvious place is to start on the textile first and then move on to other. But yeah, I definitely think there is a gap.
Super fascinating to see what's going to come and what we are going to see. So thank you so much for sharing again 33 years experience at John Lewis, and also close to 4 years experience then at Retail 100. So I think it's absolutely amazing what you've done, and having you here with us. And thank you so much again for
It's a pleasure.
making time and being on that
Pleasure. And I think
our
probably
call.
what I would finish with is, I think that's what I love about retail. It's always evolving. So 33, there's still new things happening. There's still different ways to approach. And it's a great business for that because it always changes. It's always growing. And I think we'll see lots of changes to come in the next 5 years.
Absolutely. No, let's brace ourselves. I think both getting excited about the good things, and also bracing ourselves for the next challenges in retail, because they're going to be, I think many of that. Well, Anna, thank you so much, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, I guess.
Thanks, Cedric. And we'll be in touch. Yeah. Thank you very
Absolutely.
much for your time.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.